Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for another Future Talk webinar presented by Future Nation School. Future Nation School aims to lead the African education revolution by providing a model of education that is futuristic, technology enables, and epitomizes excellence. We offer accessible, African-centered private education delivered through project-based learning, which is the subject of today's talk. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Mr. Sizwe Nxasana to lead us this evening. He's the CEO and founder of Future Nation Schools.
Thank you very much, Telu, and good evening to all our guests, our virtual guests this evening. My name, as Telu has indicated, is Sizwe Nxasana. I am the CEO and founder of Future Nation Schools, and we're very pleased to be with you today because, as we know, the world is changing very fast, and it is important that we revisit and talk about reimagining how learning and teaching takes place. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Langa to introduce herself.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And we're looking forward to talking to you. I'm Mampho Langa, head of schools, and I also teach mathematics. Thank you and welcome. I know we're all eager to know more about project-based learning, and welcome. That's the eagerness I had when I first heard about it. But before we even go into project-based learning, what I want us to look at is the current situation, because we cannot be talking about education when we haven't even looked at the current situation. The current situation we are facing now as South Africa is represented by the acronym called VUCA. What does VUCA mean? It's an acronym that represents volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. You know, when Sizwe Nxasana introduced this terminology to me, that was 2 years ago, I'm one of the optimists, and I thought, well, things are volatile, but things will get better. But look at what things are happening now. There is so much complexity about COVID, complexity about education, complexity, ambiguity about is the vaccination working. There's also uncertainty if we will finally overcome this wave. Everything is so volatile. But when things are like that, that's where we should be changing the education system to try and adapt. We need to adapt our education system and absorb as much as we can from the mistakes we have done. It means it is a learning process for everyone, but I think it's even much more for the education system. We have unemployment rate. People are so unemployed. I've got the stats there. Business services, we lost 140K people, construction industry, 111Ks, you name them, about 90 jobs also from other sectors. All in all, it means if nothing changes, we are heading for a crash. Now, if you look at the two scenarios of what I've presented in my presentation there is some, if you look at underneath, someone say, looking for a job. But on top, we have people who say, I'm a plumber, I'm a tiler. From the two scenarios, if you look at it, the one who says, I'm a plumber, I'm a tiler, is also looking for a job, but he is offering what he can do. Unlike the one who says, give me a job. So this is the type of education we need, where our students, when they leave schooling, they should be able to say, this is the knowledge I have, and I can apply the knowledge to do this and that. So it's not about the knowledge you've acquired only, it's about what you can do with that knowledge. The unemployment rate has even affected our youth, and most of our youth are just new from our schools. Look at now where it is. This is the stats that was taken at the beginning of the year. But by now, I think it has plunged down to below 40%. And it was 45% somewhere in 2008. But now it's way below that, the youth unemployment. So the context is just telling us The situation is volatile, it's complex, ambiguous, and there's a lot of uncertainty. But what can we do about this uncertainty? We need to be focusing on how best can we change our education system. I am going to be talking about project-based learning. But before we talk about it, I know everyone is it's in the lips of every person, this project-based learning, but there are a lot of misconceptions about it. What are the misconceptions? First of all, people think it's a technical course because we are designing projects. It is not a technical course or anything. PBL is not even a curriculum. It is the mode that we use to navigate a curriculum. There are people who even say, if I'm doing CAPS, now what are we talking about PBL? It's not a curriculum. There is also a misconception that it's an impossible thing to do. I'm not going to do it. And when you do PBL, you concentrate only on projects, content is not done. So content disappears. And because originally it comes from America, there's a misconception that it would not be applied to the South African context. It can be applied. Very, very key. Assessment is not only based on group work. When we do projects, the assessment starts from the beginning of the project. So that's just what I wanted to clear out when we talk about PBL. But why do we want to focus on that? Because we have challenges in our current teaching strategies. We teach to the test, exams, because we want results, and results are good for the reputation of the school. That's what we're looking for. And that on its own, it makes the teaching to lack flexibility, creativity to deal with real life demands or problems. Problem analysis is lacking there. Theory, in most cases, when you focus on teaching to the test, there is no practice. So students cannot do self-inquiry, self-discovery, innovation, technology cannot be used effectively. Subjects are taught in silos. It's a period for maths, it's a period for physics, no interaction or no integration. And there's a colonized mindset. We always believe that anything that comes from the textbook, which is more Eurocentric, is much more legitimate than our African indigenous knowledge system. I know in some books you do get little bit, but a little bit of that indigenous knowledge system here and there, but what is predominantly taught is Eurocentric. The language of teaching and learning at the moment is English. And that's what people believe is the in thing. You know, there are people who even would tell you, I want my child to be taught by people who speak English as a home language. Our languages, our African languages, are not given that symbolic power that it deserves. And that the languages that we speak at home can also be used for teaching. We need to change our mindset, that colonized mindset, in order to navigate some of these things, and it will help us to improve our education system. Why do we need to change? You know, there was a research that was conducted, I think that was 4 or 5 years ago, and it indicates that in the first half of this pyramid, if you look at it, if you do lecturing, reading, and audiovisual, the only absorption or retention or the understanding that comes with it, it's 20% or less. Lecturing is even worse. You are wasting time. The more you lecture is the more you will not know if the student understands. Why am I talking about this? The aim, we need to start focusing below the pyramid, where everything we teach should be converted into practice by doing, discussion, collaborative teaching, where we're able to teach each other. And if we do that, we're able to ensure that there's understanding going on and there's practicality that comes with that. Now, what is this project-based learning? From what I have put together, in a nutshell, I could say project-based learning, it's teaching that ignites those inquiring minds. How do we ignite those inquiring minds? How do we make sure that the knowledge that they bring into the class is used? Is we allow them to start questioning things. Every time when you give them a project, there will be a challenging problem, a question, there will be critiquing that comes with it, there would be a student voice. I will talk more about all of those. Those things, we need them every time when we teach. And we know it's not all the time when we teach, when we design projects. I would give an example because I'm a maths person. If you teach factorization, you can't bring in a project for that, but you can bring in questioning, the type of questioning that you give the students, the type of teaching that you would give to the students will make them to want to know more. But there are also other things beyond just in the classroom where we'll be looking, how can we design projects? I've got an example of driving questions. Now, if you are to design a project, first of all, you need to have an end goal. By end goal, it means there should be an outcome of what is involved in what we want to achieve. Now, I've got examples of driving questions, how technology altered languages. It's a driving question. And this question does not come from nowhere. People came together and language people came together and look at the language. Has the language improved since we have technology? Or has the language changed? Or has the language increased? Or what about the African languages since we introduced technology? So it means language people came together, be it English, be it Afrikaans, be it Zulu, be it whatever. They came together and came with that driving question. In that driving question, what is implied is that students are going to start doing research. And as they research, they are learning skills of researching, and they are acquiring the language that has been altered, if there is anything that has been altered. I think we can see all of us most of the time, you'll see we start using bo, lol, you know, things like that. That is an alteration of the language. But did it enrich the language or did it make the language even worse? That's a driving question. It comes in when a group of teachers from different subjects come together. Things like, can diseases change the world? That on its own, it means you had some natural science who was thinking about virus and bacteria. Did it change the world? Yes, we can include people from history. We can include people from geography. What happened when there were diseases? And we can even include the context we have. So that on its own makes it a driving question. Now it ignites those inquiring minds. Students will start thinking on how best can we answer that question. And when we answer that question, when we put in that question, it should be an open-ended one that will make students to think. I've put in a lot of them. Is virtual learning effective? Do we have too much freedom? Is it better to buy or lease a car? All those are questions that you could put onto your students and they would bring these things together. The next part, every time, whenever you put those questions, you're trying to sustain the inquiry. It means the students need to come together and have that educational experience. They could go outside for help. That's what we call adult connection or the social presence. Sometimes they would want to know more about the design of a building. They might want to know about how to construct a bridge. Then they would consult someone outside. And as they're doing that, cognitive presence comes in. They would be thinking. The content that they will select, they would know what kind of content they would need to answer those questions. You would be setting the climate as a teacher, and the discourse that would be in there would be something that would be, you know, igniting those inquiring minds. And as a teacher, it doesn't mean your presence won't be there. You'd always be there. So sustain those inquiring minds. We need to ensure that in our teaching, everything we do is authentic. We don't want to talk about squirrels when we hardly see any squirrels in our environment. We don't want to talk about things that are not there. If, you know, I remember there was a time when I was teaching about the roller coaster and teaching mathematics, the graphing. And some of the students come from rural areas. So it means the problem I was posing to students about the roller coaster was not authentic. I did not consider their context because some of the students did not understand what a roller coaster is. So whatever question you're posing, whatever teaching you're giving them should be something that they can relate to. And if they can relate to something, it is easier for them to learn. And then learning becomes cooler and much more meaningful if it's something that is authentic. Very, very, very important. Teaching should not be taught in silos, where you'll find that when it is maths, things are done separately, physics are done separately, there's no connectivity. I've put in examples that we've done in our schools when we're integrating subjects. Before we even do our planning, we need to come together and see how it's done. I'll give you an example. This is just handwritten. This was a geography grade 7. They were going to do historical development of astronomy. Do you see it's handwritten? And history, they were going to do across the Sahara Desert. Now, all the other subjects will be reflecting what they will be doing for the first term. By the way, nothing has been planned yet. That's what you think you are going to do. Then now you come with the sticky notes. In the sticky notes, you look at what is common in what it's going to be taught. And that is why you see the sticky notes. The sticky notes are implying, they'll be talking about astronomy and some earthquake. I might need that, maybe the astronomy for computing, or I might need for the historical development. And now if you look at it, English indicated that they could use indigenous stories to talk about that, because they're talking about indigenous things. Natural science, they were talking about the historical development of life. So they would put a sticky note that, so it means when we do planning, we need to do planning together. And finally, the project that came out of this, the students were designing how ancient people calculated time. And the calculation needed mathematical measurement and some instruments. It was a beautiful instrument, but it was practical. Students will never forget about the historical event of the astronomy of whatever happened, because it was done practically. Another example in foundation phase, they're doing shapes this term, and they started reading about shapes in English. And in mathematics, they started identifying shapes. What's a triangle? What's a hexagon? And in life skills, what are the roles of shapes in our community? So it means students can see the shapes in all the subjects rather than in different spheres of their teaching. You know, another example which I love the most, it reminds me of the senior phase where they were talking about bacteria and viruses, and they collected data and did some data analysis. By the way, data analysis, you get it in maths, you get it in physics. What they did, they collected a bacteria from the toilet seats, from the handrails, from wherever, in places where we get, you know, where we touch. And that was before the COVID. And they took that virus and they grew it in the laboratory. And as they were doing that, they were following steps of research, of data analysis, of data handling, and all of that. And the mathematical part that came in here, they were looking at how the exponential growth of bacteria happens. So it means they were seeing bacteria using a microscope, but they could not count it. That's where you would bring in and say, do you see exponential growth of bacteria in mathematics can multiply at this rate? And it also brought in the issue of hygiene and personal health, which we deal with in life orientation. This did not just come in from nowhere. It is when people come together in order to do integration or curriculum mapping. That's very key also for project-based learning. Another important aspect for project-based learning, the student voice and choice. Very important that when you give them a project or you give them a question or that question, include every student. There should be inclusion, integration of their ideas. Some would come with ideas that will make you go, yo, I never thought about that. And that on its own will transform your class, will transform the teaching, will transform the child, because they know they have a voice and the voice is recognized. And that would empower their thinking. That would make them know they've got the ability to innovate, they've got the ability to change. It makes them feel they have the capability to change the world. Very important, what we do is reflection. We do not only just end there. You know, there's a book that was designed by the grade 7s, that was 2 or 3 years ago, where they were talking about my project journey. In the project journey, they were indicating some of the hiccups they encountered, and it ended up being a book. And if you look at it, very interesting on the reflection. So this ended up being a final product of their reflection. But reflection doesn't end there. We also allow teachers, we also allow students to give feedback. Like, for example, there's an instrument that we use to give feedback. I don't know if you can see that new share. Can you see that, Tulo? Tulo, can you see what I've just shared now?
Yeah, we can see it.
I can.
Okay, yeah. We use this instrument to give feedback. Now, when we give feedback or when we do critiquing, we always say, be hard on content, be soft, but soft on people. We avoid using the word you or the teacher or whatever. We pretend as if we're talking to someone who's not there. Now, if you look at the document, the first thing that would allow people to do is say, you come and probe the clarifying questions. Why did you think this would work? Or what did you want to achieve with this? Then we allow in the second step for people to have a discussion. In that discussion, it allows people to look at how you can improve it. And after that, we would expect a response either from the teacher or whatever. And finally, if we move in, you will be given an opportunity as the presenter to come in and tell us how you have learned and what you think about what you are presenting. And that all in all, it makes people not to feel uncomfortable to give reflection or to self-assess themselves. So that is very key for students to know that assessment is very key to self-assess and also to accept criticism. Very important for project-based learning. The last part, which is, I don't know, why is it? The last part, it's not moving, but the last part is very, very important. It's when we come in with a presentation. We do not just end up with what we have designed and what the marks. By the way, I'm repeating, assessment is ongoing. A project, when it's designed, it's ongoing. It's not something that is done at the end of the lesson, or the project is designed at the end of the lesson. It is something that is ongoing. We do not assess at the end of it. So when we do presentation, the presentation is one way where we are telling the world. We invite parents, we invite people, we invite teachers, we invite our colleagues and say, this is my final product. and this is what I have done. So the final part is that it doesn't end in the books. It has to be presented and be accepted by the public so that we interrogate the people who have researched and all of that. I think in a nutshell, this is what project-based learning is all about. I don't know, Tulo, if there are any questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Mam Langa. So what we're going to do now, ladies and gentlemen, is that our CEO, Babsu, is going to come back. He has a few questions for Mam Langa. I do request that if anybody, has any questions for Mam Langa, please put it in the chat, and then we will address these within Q&A, which happens just after Babsu has had his conversation. Okay. All right, Babsu, over to you.
No, thanks very much. Thanks, Mam Langa. Thanks for that presentation. Really, really interesting. You know, even though I'm one of the junior teachers at Future Nation Schools, when I listen to your presentation as one of the team, you know, it suddenly just introduces different perspectives in terms of what this is. So why is this done? Obviously, you know, I'm asking a rhetorical question here. I'm a chartered accountant, and I've been asked by the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants to review the reasons why there is a high failure rate for those who want to study and qualify as chartered accountants. Maybe just to give our guests an indication, you know, when you start to become a CA, you write an exam immediately after doing your postgrad, which is called Board 1 or otherwise ITC, and then you write the second part 20 months into your training, for instance, if you're serving articles. The pass rate for Africans was 24.9% in the last exam. In other words, only 1 out of 4 Africans passed to become CAs. And I've started, I mean, it's now my second week of doing the review, and I'm doing the investigation of what goes on at universities, what goes on in the training offices, what goes on in, there are certain people who prepare students for the second part of the board exam. But one of the major findings that I've already made is the fact that for the most part, universities are still teaching in silos. In other words, you get taught accounting, taxation, management accounting, auditing by lecturers who sometimes hardly even talk to one another. And yet the exam, the professional exam, amongst the things that it tests and assesses is the ability to integrate knowledge. So they get presented, students and candidates get presented with case studies where they are required to solve problems by using knowledge domains that, you know, they've covered over the academic program. In other words, you have to use knowledge that comes from accounting, from tax, from auditing, and so on to solve a problem. And that's where a lot of our students fall down. And especially Africans, because, you know, most of the historically Black universities particularly are still teaching in silos. So I'm just showing, and this is not only in chartered accountancy where this is happening. If you go to engineering, actuarial science, most of the areas of professions are now requiring integration of knowledge, are requiring, you know, the skills and competences of people who can solve problems. Yet the education system is still
to focus on the broad-based Black economic empowerment schemes, specifically those that...
Can we please, Pumzile Majola, can you still please mute? Thank you. So if we continue teaching the traditional way, which is what a lot of schools still do, clearly we're failing our children. I think that's very important, let alone the fact that the world is, as you said, Memlanga, is becoming a lot more uncertain, volatile, and so on, and we need to create entrepreneurs. Can you just talk about, at Future Nation Schools, how the teachers, especially teachers who come from a traditional way of teaching, and that makes up the majority of teachers, how we deal with preparing teachers for this new way of, for this integrated way of working with others, of how we plan and so on. Just talk to us about that, please.
Yeah, this is where teacher development program plays an important role. Very, very key. First of all, we expose our teachers to a project-based learning during induction, but that's not enough. We also dedicate about 144 hours only to teacher development program, where we get teachers who would demonstrate how they teach in the class, where we would get teachers who demonstrate the projects that they're going to do or they have done, where we get teachers who will show them and hold your hand that I am going to show how it's done. Every new teacher that comes into our environment is assigned to what we call a critical friend. A critical friend, it means a mentorship. So in the mentorship, they would meet once or twice a week, depending on the subject or the complexity or the demand. This is how we do it. I don't understand. Now, how do I navigate this? What about the technology? You know, sometimes it's even struggling just with technology. How do I do it? This is how it's done. And we also do a lot of demo. So there's nothing that beats teacher development program. That is our key area for new teachers. Thank you.
I would imagine, I mean, because you're going to have a lot of teachers who may have been teaching for many, many years, and therefore may be resistant to change in terms of how things are done. And therefore this mentorship and having critical friends, you know, helps quite a great deal in terms of just, you know, how people unlearn what they've been doing all along and learn new ways of doing things. You know, obviously, one of the things, and you mentioned it, in project-based learning is around assessments, especially assessments not just of the subjects in terms of curriculum, but assessments of whether or not our students are acquiring critical thinking skills, acquiring problem-solving skills and ability to work with others, and the ability to really, you know, be creative in finding solutions to problems. Just talk to us about that, please.
You know, once you start any lesson with just regurgitating, just forget about the student. Actually, some of them will start taking out their cell phones and start, you know, engaging in things that will keep them busy. So with project-based learning, because most of the time, the type of questioning that we put into them, be it in form of a project, be it in form of teaching, it makes them now to start thinking even deeper. The key important thing about project-based learning is that it gives them the deeper learning. Deeper learning goes with, how do I solve this problem? What is it that I have to do to solve it? So the minute they start thinking about, how do I solve the problem, rather than waiting for the teacher to tell them how to solve it, it empowers them in the sense that they start thinking independently. They would even start learning independently because they know that they are given an opportunity, that voice to start thinking, that voice to start questioning. And that on its own, it's very key for critical thinking, very key for reasoning, very key for thinking out of the box. So that also lays a platform for that type of thinking. So that, to me, I really feel that's the key towards problem solving.
Yeah, can I just two questions, and then we'll open the floor for all the questions. The first question is, I mean, you put up a slide that shows, you know, the joblessness that we all know, the crisis of the COVID-19, as well as the slow economic growth that's created in the country. If you just share with us maybe an example of how project-based learning and entrepreneurship, so where students learn how to start, how that you know, can be done using PBL. And then the second question is, I mean, obviously one of the things that PBL normally requires is for students to work together, and pre-COVID, they would have been working together physically. How is COVID and blended learning, which includes technology, impacted how these collaboration skills and ability to work together individually or in teams has been able to be accomplished.
Yeah, maybe let me talk about what happens to our students when they leave school after they've done project-based learning. What we need to take into cognizance is that our student as early as grade 1, they are able to research. They are able to look for answers to questions. So before we could even go anywhere, that's a skill they would need. And that skill, it makes them to know that I do not have to look for someone to help me with a problem. Yes, I would need help, but what can I do first before I could ask for help? So in a way, it empowers them to start thinking on problem solving. So it means they're solution driven rather than posing problems. The scenario that I showed, you had two scenarios. The other one said, I need job. I think it's written like that. The other one says, I need job. But the other said, I'm a tiler, I'm an electrician, I'm a plumber. Both of them are looking for a job. But the one who says, I can do this, would be the one who would consider, because it means I do not only learn, but I applied the knowledge. So that theory that I learned, I've put it into practice. So that's the key when it comes to project-based learning. Unlike the one who said, I'm looking for a job, even if the knowledge is minimal, but that knowledge should at least be able to be applied into real life. So the two people could be having the literacy level that's the same, but the difference is that the other one can apply and the other one couldn't apply. So that's the difference. PBL gives them the opportunity to be able to apply the knowledge because they get exposed to different scenarios, and there's a lot of work that comes from their own thinking. And your second question, Mr. Nxasana, was on what?
Technology, on the COVID environment and blended learning and working in teams, collaboration, and so on.
You know, blended learning has, COVID has affected us so much that we couldn't do a lot of projects because most of the projects that we designed, they would come together, come up. I remember there was a time where some of them were even ambitious that they would even want to go to a point of building a bridge. But that is not possible. But we do have projects that we design, even if they don't come together where they would exchanging hands, but they do. If you look at the very same slide that I've shown, there is where they sit together and discuss with the spacing. So it did not prohibit our students from designing. They can design through technology, through virtual talking or whatever, and it has made us to even think beyond with the technology. Right now, we have what we call a portal. Our students can access the portal, be able to get the information and even to get the lessons. And if COVID comes, we'll be able to say, we're on lesson 14, please access it. So it means technology has enabled PBL even more, because without technology, PBL is not possible. So PBL, technology has enabled a technology to even continue even more. And we started thinking about better ideas on how to do PBL without being in contact with people. So it has also improved our technology. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ma'am Langa. I'm now going to hand back to Tlulu to facilitate the Q&A question. I see that quite a lot of questions in the chat. And if you have further questions for those who may not have posted their questions on the chat, please do so. So over to you, Tlulu, if you just facilitate the Q&A, please.
Sure, thanks, Bob Sizwe. So, Ma'am Langa, here's a question by Zukim Zozo Yana. The question is, what is the key difference between inquiry-based learning and project-based learning? And does Future Nation School handle both or just PBL?
Okay. Thank you. Is that no? Thank you so much. That's a very good question. Now, project-based learning and inquiry-based learning. There is no project-based learning without inquiry. There is no inquiry without project-based learning. Now, this is what we do at Future Nation Schools. We are quite aware that there are instances where you cannot be designing projects. I'll give a very same example of, I'm teaching factorization. Factorization, I want to say, I want to come up with a project for factorization. But when I go into the class, I will look at the first thing that I'll do would be inquiry. You put a sum on the board. Even if they know it or they don't know it, you inquire. So that's the first thing that you put them, you engage them with something. After engaging them, allow them to explain. You know the inquiry base with the 5 E's, allow them to explain. And then after explaining, you intervene and say, what makes your question right? What makes you, so all those are brought together because of one thing. The main thing is inquiry. So both of them are related. We cannot separate them. Inquiry base can be used where we cannot design a project, but project-based learning where we can design a project. They are related. None of the two can be separated. I hope I've answered the question.
Absolutely, Ma'am Langa. Thank you for that. The next question is from Winile, who says she loves PBL and says, how many kids are in each class, and how do teachers deal with children that understand learning in a different way? The context for a question is that most schools are quick to send them students who understand learning in a different way to remedial schools instead of acknowledging the method and the number of children that play a role in understanding. So the question is, how many kids are in each class, and how do teachers deal with children that understand learning in a different way?
Yeah, at the moment, when I use the traditional way of describing, would say 30 per class. That was before PBL, but with we are not before COVID, but after COVID, we're running 20, depending on the class, 25, max would be a 25. And project-based learning accommodates that different thinking. Because there's a student voice and choice, that's where your child will be accommodated. Because that's the thinking we are looking for. We're looking for thinking that's different from the teacher's one. We're looking for the thinking that would make us think, I never thought it that way. So your child will be accommodated in a PBL classroom. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And then another question from Sinako. So her question is, do webinars and live classes on remote learning solve the challenges of studying in silos? She says she's an online lecturer with 51 students, but only 7 or 8 attend the live classes. Students are only interested in assignments that bear marks. So how can we create projects that need co-interaction? That's a question to you, Ma'am Lang.
Yeah. There is no way you could have a integrated studies without planning with your colleagues. So we need a collaborative effort for all the lecturers to come together and say, you know what, let us look at the curriculum. What is common? What is not common? What can we do about this? What kind of a project or an assignment that can make them to start thinking out of the box? Now, maybe you're combining mathematics, you combine it with physics, you combine it, I'm just talking university courses, and say, there are some similarities. Can't we come up with a project? That way, before even you asking them to come to class, they'll be wanting to know more because they would want to say, this is what I've investigated, and what do you think, and all of that. So that can ignite the interest. So in most cases, students are not interested because what we're teaching is the same thing all the time. Sometimes we just regurgitate information as it is from the textbook.
I also want to add, if I may, that part of it, in addition to educators, whether they are teachers or lecturers planning together, the way that the assessments are done, because all of us understand carrots and sticks, and therefore, if the lecturers or the teachers are planning together and they are designing projects or as part of the assessment process, they actually have projects which may be case studies, maybe activities, maybe things that students need to solve together where knowledge is integrated. And students understand that their assessment, in other words, their marks, are going to depend on their demonstration of the competencies of integrating knowledge, of solving problems, and marks are allocated accordingly. So it's not just planning for the lesson, it's also planning assessment and creating assessment tools together. There may be rubrics, there may be memoranda, there may be whatever, you know, or the marking grids and so on. But all those assessment tools and how they are applied have to test for the ability to integrate knowledge, to solve problems, to work together and all of this. And students simply follow. So if they know that, you know, assessments are only done in silos, of course they're not going to, you know, attend physically, they're not going to work together and so on.
Sure, thank you for that, Bob Sizwe. And then I have 2 questions which I'll sort of combine into one because they get short answers, I suppose. It's from Ms. K. More, and it says, how could parents be empowered to integrate PBL in the daily home routine? Are there any recommended PBL resources? And then secondly, is the project-based way of learning introduced at the elementary level of teaching at Future Nations?
Elementary as in preschool? Yes, of course, no doubt about it. We introduce PBL as early as preschool, grade R, foundation phase, up until high school. We definitely start as early as elementary school. And then when it comes to home environment, you know, when I tell parents this, they always say, woo, Memlang, I won't be able to do that. Sit down with your children. Talk about your budget. Your children should understand how you budget. And some parents feel like, they'll know how much I'm earning. And the more they understand about how much you're earning, is the more they will understand that the importance of money. And that on its own, it empowers them to mathematically, it empowers them to life skills that they will need as they grow, and they learn to be responsible. So involve your children as much as you can, even if you have a family boss barat, when you say, today we're going to buy a car, let's talk about the budget. This is what we have. Can we afford a car? You know, small conversations like that, they would change the life of your child. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mamlanga. And then there's another question, but I think you may have touched on it. So maybe let's touch on it briefly again. To what extent would the teachers be ready for managing this mode of teaching and learning?
We don't have a stage where we will say we're managing it. I haven't managed it myself. It is an ongoing learning. We learn from each other every time. Whenever we meet for a teacher development program, there's something that you learn going, I never thought I understood this. Oh, I saw an article from the internet. By the way, information is available from the internet about PBL, enormous, lots of them. So where you learn every day. No one can say I'm an expert already. Thank you.
I think the important thing there is obviously lifelong learning, that even us as teachers have to understand that, you know, students come with a lot of prior knowledge into the classroom. Teachers have different, you know, knowledge domains which they come from. And therefore sharing this and working in a community where learning, and in a class, I mean, I've been in a lot of classes where students ask me questions. I have to be, you know, mature enough to say, let's go and find out, all of us.
Yeah.
That encourages a learning process for everybody, you know, because we don't know, you know, we may have been teaching for 30 years, but there are a lot of new things that as a teacher, you have to be prepared and able to learn and unlearn old ways of doing things.
Yeah.
Sure. And then we have a question from Tshepo Mutlasedi. And this question is directed at Mr. Nxasana. I believe you may have sparked it as you spoke about math stats and such. As a CA, as per the World Economic Forum, top 20 specialized skills of the future, CA as a career is not listed in their chart. Where, in your opinion, does it leave this career path?
Well, CAs are still going to be with us for many, many years. It may not be in the WEF, but actually, you know, interestingly, when you look at, and I've seen that, you know, the documents from WEF, CAs today, which is why the way CAs are being trained has had to change to a more project-based approach. you know, CAs, like for instance, let's just take the JSE. The JSE has by far more than 30% of the CEOs of the JSE listed companies are CAs. It's the ability to adapt with the training that you get from just straight traditional accounting to other knowledge domains that include strategy, the ability to lead, the ability to migrate from one area to the other. I mean, I'll just make myself as an example. You know, I started in auditing, and from auditing, I went to telecoms, from telecoms to banking. I'm now a school teacher and an educator. The skills and competencies that enable me to do that, the skills are acquired as an accountant. So that's why we have to stop thinking in silos about professions, but rather think about how do we empower young people, which is what we're trying to do at Future Nation Schools. How do we empower young people to understand that they are capable of moving from one knowledge domain to the other? And you empower them, you give them the skills and competencies to do that. They'll never be irrelevant. Doesn't matter what happens in the world.
Thank you for that. And then I have a question from an unidentified user, just as iPhone. Mamlang, this is for you. How does PBL help address the issue of reading without understanding? Example, English story reading without comprehending the content or context.
You know what? I think it doesn't even need PBL for reading to be done with understanding. I know we have a huge backlog or a huge problem in South Africa when it comes to reading. And I think if you heard in one of my slides where I mentioned the type of teaching that we are faced with is that we have introduced English as our teaching and learning media. And that on its own, it's a problem. Countries that are doing well out there, they are teaching using their mother tongue as the medium of instruction. So most of the time, that issue of reading without understanding comes from students whose mother tongue is not English. So that is a debate on its own. There might, I think I'm one of those who read without understanding as a child at elementary phase. You would read, you know, like a recitation, Twinkle, Twinkle Star. It was meaningless to me. It's something that I've memorized and I would get a mark for that. But that's key, that those are some of things that we need to think about. Why is English getting such a huge symbolic power more than our own African languages? It's a huge debate. It's something that needs a debate some other day, but the contributing factors towards that, more than just PBL, could be the language of learning and teaching. We memorize and pass because it's not our language, we don't understand it. So it is a huge hindrance to our learning or to our understanding.
And maybe just while we're on the subject of languages, so Koketo asks, what are the other languages offered to learners on the different campuses? How do you assist learners who don't speak the languages that is offered? Example, most schools offer Afrikaans as a second language. And her question is, what are the other languages that we offer to students? Yeah. Does that make sense? Should I repeat that?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. Right now, we do have students that come from ex-Model C schools who are coming with Afrikaans as a first additional language. But we have taken a stance as a Future Nation school that we are going to phase out Afrikaans as our first additional language. We are introducing more African languages, because what we notice, and research has also is supporting us, is that most of the students who are taking Afrikaans as first additional language, their results, the average of their results are brought down by Afrikaans, because it is not a language that's spoken around them. But if they take an African language, their average improves because they are taking a language that they understand. So in a way, Afrikaans, we're phasing it out. We're trying to introduce as many languages as we can. Actually, right now, we're even talking about, would rather even resort to online teaching of other African languages. That's the stance we want to take as a Future Nation Schools.
Sure, thank you for that, Ma. And then there's a question from Kihumile, which says, can you differentiate in PBL? That is, can you cater for different learning styles and learning abilities under one project?
You know, the main thing, I remember when I visited HTH in San Diego, the gentleman who pioneered this project-based learning was almost in tears when he introduced this to us. He said what he likes about project-based learning was equity. And I was, listening, what do you mean by equity? He said, with project-based learning, this is the time where students of different learning abilities, different of intellectual ability would come together and work collaboratively without making the others feel that they are not important. So it gives them an opportunity to excel in spheres or in sections that they are good at. So that's the advantage of PBL. It's actually the best differentiated learning.
Sure, thank you. And then I have a question just about Future Nation in general. Is our matric certificate or matric qualification, will it enable our students to go study overseas upon completion? Does it do that?
Yeah, I think we need to go back to PBL is not a curriculum. It is a mode that we use to teach CAPS. We are going to write finally end of the year the IEB exams, and which are grade 12. So we are writing exams, but the advantage with our students, even if they will write an exam where they had to regurgitate information, is that by the time they go to university, they've acquired much better skills of learning than in a normal traditional school. So that would give them, I think, with also international studying, it's a possibility. Definitely, I don't doubt it.
Sure. And then maybe a very specific question around mathematics is, how can project-based learning help understanding in mathematics and improve overall performance in mathematics?
You know, mathematics more than just project-based learning. I remember I had a conversation with Sizwe when he was showing me that only 19% of the students, of the African students, can get 60% in mathematics at the end of grade 12. It really broke my heart that, this is a very sad situation. Maths at the moment, why is maths lagging behind? We need to come together and identify what the problem is. The problem is we need to look at why our students are lacking the basics. We've got students at matric level who cannot even add fractions. Where do you get fractions? Fractions when they were taught at primary level. If they were taught using project-based learning, where they had an idea that a fraction 1/4 is bigger than 1/8. Practically, they see that, then that would have meaning by the time they go to matric, there wouldn't be an issue of not knowing that which one is bigger between 1/4 and 1/8. So those are the issues we have, and we need to sit down and try to identify them and try to fix them. And we should start as early as foundation phase. Right now, as we are talking, our preschool scholars are busy with the PBL, and they can even tell you, even though they cannot comprehend 1/8, but they would take a piece out of a pie. They will show you that this is smaller because it has been cut into more pieces than this 1/4 that has been cut into fewer pieces. That's the skill we need to make our mathematics better.
Yeah, I think maybe just to add, it is about demystifying maths, because I think as people, we've been, brought up to believe that mathematics is actually complicated, which is one of the reasons why Future Nation Schools is a math school. We do not offer maths literacy at Future Nation Schools, and we are very adamant about that, because to the extent that people continue to believe that mathematics is difficult, we believe that every child has the ability to learn the basic principles and actually even apply the principles of mathematics. Because, you know, if we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, there's no fourth industrial revolution participation of our young people if they do not have mathematics. You can't do coding, you can't do computing, you can't, of course you can do certain things in the arts and so on in humanities, but there are a lot of areas that you cannot even get into. And unfortunately in this country, we've seen a significant decline in schools that are offering mathematics in favor of maths literacy, which is a dead-end street for a lot of our young people that are being failed by the system. So, you know, and the point that Langa is saying is really, really true. I mean, the stats are there from the Department of Basic Education. Out of 640,000 young people who wrote matric last year, there were only 120,000 who wrote and registered for mathematics, and out of that, only 55,000 passed. And pass, I mean 30%. And out of that 30% plus, or 55,000 plus, only 22,000 got 50% plus. Only about 17,000 or so got 60% plus. And if you want to get into data science, engineering, accounting, actuarial science, you've got to have at least 60% in mathematics. And for Africans, if we have the low numbers that we have, which by the way are less than 10,000 out of the whole 640,000 who wrote matric last year, out of that less than 10,000, we have to produce doctors, engineers, data scientists, mathematicians, and so on. So as a people, we're just being left behind. So we've got to do our best to, one, produce teachers that love mathematics, and secondly, to transmit that love for mathematics and demystification of mathematics to our young people.
And that is why in our schools, the pass mark is 60%, because we believe every child is capable of achieving that. Just winning them, that confidence goes a long way.
And 60% on every subject, not just an average.
Thank you very much for that. And then there's a question around integration of curriculum. So the question is from Kogetso, and the question is, how do you incorporate the caps, so from grade 1 to 11, with the sudden change to IEB and matric? Are they able to cope with the change in curriculum?
Maybe what we need to clarify is that IEB is not a curriculum. IEB is an exam. So when people talk about IEB, it's not a curriculum. Nationally, all of us were using caps. The only difference is how do we assess at the end of grade 12? That's the only difference. So caps is there. They are using caps, even IEB schools, because it's our national curriculum. The difference is the assessment. So there is no change. The curriculum is the same. Same applies when we say PBL. We are using a PBL to navigate the very same caps. But finally, we are going to write IEB exams.
Sure. And then a question from Terence is, what is the school stance on incorporating international certification exams like ACCA, CIMA, IBM, Microsoft, A+? So exams that give students practical skills. And the reason why he says is because he understands that not everyone is destined for university. So he just wants to know what our stance is as Future Nation schools.
I'm not very good when it comes to technology. You want to take that one?
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
You know, one of the things that we offer, we have an enhanced curriculum. So even though Mem Langa is correct in saying our students will write the IEB exam at the end of matric, and you know, all of us obviously use the CAPS curriculum. We've enhanced that curriculum. I think it's important to mention that. What does that mean?
Yeah.
It means we've added a number of subjects that are not necessarily examinable for CAPS, that create pathways for our people to do exactly, you know, what the question was asking. In other words, let's just take computing. In computing, which includes coding, robotics that we offer at our schools, you know, we are looking to have a situation where not only do you go and write computing as a subject at grade 12, but also you acquire the certification, because very often, as we all know, the certification for computing, I mean, you could be a a SAP certified person, you could be an Oracle certified person, you could be, in fact, we have Oli Mahlangu here, who's the head of our computing, who's on this call, who structured the course that creates pathways for young people. So at grade 9 already, in fact, even earlier, our grade 8s can develop apps, can develop websites, they can program using different languages, and those languages increase in terms of scope. So may do Java, may do, all the other computer languages as we progress with our students, so that if they exit for whatever reason, maybe sometimes that's their passion. And we do have students who've expressed their passion that all they want to do is to be in IT, to be programmers, to be software developers, to be app developers. So we've got to be able to give them those skills and competencies so that they can go and use those skills without necessarily having to go to university, as an example.
Sure.
So, Toli, I'm not sure if Toli is still here.
Yes, I am still here. And I agree with most of the things. So with the grade 10s and 11s, most of their curriculum is actually certification. And we are sitting with kids in our campuses that have got IBM certifications on building chatbots, on data science, introduction to big data and cloud computing. So it is quite vast.
Thanks, Toli.
Thanks, Colin.
Oh, and then I think this, unless I'm not sure, but I guess just a final question from Sipho Dlamini. It says, from your presentation, your school is doing this as a whole school, but we have learned that educational innovations do not diffuse easily in our South African context. Can we try to use a few teachers in the school to implement PBL or to develop resources that teachers can easily use to implement project-based learning?
I'm not sure I get that question.
So the question, I'll just focus on the final part. So it says, can we try, I think it's can Future Nations School try to use a few teachers within Future Nations to implement PBL or develop resources that teachers can easily use to implement PBL? So externally, as a resource, can we function?
Right.
Can we function as a resource? Yes.
Okay.
Well, Mem Langa is the right person to answer that question because she's busy addressing exactly that question.
Yeah, right now we're busy designing a program, an online program on PBL. And we're quite aware that PBL online is not sufficient enough. So we are also be thinking on how best can we make sure that whatever is learned PBL can be applied also one-on-one. So that's what we're busy working on. Otherwise, I think by end of this month, we should be having that program up and running. So external people should be able to access what we are doing.
Yeah, but I think in terms of the actual launch externally of our online PBL course, which will include some practical elements, as Memlan is saying, we're looking to offer that in the market definitely by January. We may, obviously, we've also, we may have some people that have approached us because of our knowledge and expertise in PBL, that we may be able to start with much earlier than next year. But definitely, we'll start marketing that course, before the end of the year for people to enroll, and they can do it over, sort of different periods from next year already.
No, thank you very much for that. And I think then that is all for this evening. So thank you very much for your time, Nxasana, as well as for the presentation, Mampho Langa. To all our guests, the recording of the Future Talk will be made available on the Future Nations website on Monday. So please, on our website, under the events tab, you will be able to access the recording. Otherwise, thank you very much, and everybody have a great evening.